And our first speaker will be Warren Fahey, who probably needs no introduction to any of you. And as Warren says, although he can't change a tyre, flat tyre on a car, he's done just about everything else that can possibly be done in relation to the promotion, performance, packaging, presentation, collecting, archiving, etc. of Australian folklore in a very long career. His most recent work, I think it's his most recent anyway, he's got a book called Hop, Skip and Jump and on children's folklore, and that's what he's going to talk about today. So, Warren Fahey.
Colonel Sanders came to town riding on a chicken, stuck his finger up its bum and said it's finger licking. I don't need to tell you about children's folklore. I'm sure you know as much as I do. It's just that for the past 60 odd years I've been scribbling bits of it down. I've done a lot of work in talking to kids and videoing kids doing clapping rhymes and so forth, visited Aboriginal communities and was always fascinated how the kids entertained each other. So I, as Graham mentioned, I put out a book. I think it's my 30th odd book. My books are really my filing cabinet. That's the way I look at it. I'm certainly no expert in children's folklore. There are experts. In fact, there's a conference coming up that Judy McKinley has put together, I think, which will be interesting, where people dissect and talk about how the collecting of children's folklore and the documentation and how it's changing and how it's relevant to the 21st century. So, if I'm not an expert in children's folklore, what I think I am is, apart from being a folklore recycling unit, and that's how I've described myself for years, is I see my role as somebody who enthuses people about various aspects of Australian culture. I decided to write the book, and this is a copy of it here. It's a history of Australian children's amusements. It's a weighty tome, it's quite heavy, but I had quite a lot to document because my files were quite large. I mean, these are very weird times we live in, and I think that, you know, folklore can teach us a lot across all of its borders, that we have a unique culture in Australia, and as most of you know, that's been probably my main reason for certainly starting and certainly singing the bush songs and the city ditties and so forth, is that I thought that somehow or other somebody needed to wave the flag and identify Australian culture. I happen to do it through what I call songs and poems and stories, which I call signposts. And the children's stuff is a bit the same, although we don't always recognise it. In 30 minutes, I was going to give you a really good illustrated look at it, because there's lots of pictures and drawings in the book, but I'm far more interesting than any picture. 30 minutes isn't very long. In many ways, when I finished the book, I realised it was a lament for a lot of the child amusement that I grew up with and that you grew up with. The politically correct cops have been very busy in the children's arena. I mean, I've got a whole section on getting mobile. No, not getting on your mobile, but actually getting mobile, and one of those was the billy cart. And when you look at the history of the billy cart, I still have a scar just there from where I fell off my fabulous billy cart. I didn't have brakes. I didn't realise you needed brakes. But billy carts were banned completely. Started in New South Wales, spread everywhere else. Tree climbing. I mean, we climbed every sort of trees. Now they even put sort of wire around them that you can't sort of climb trees. Razzle-dazzles. Do you remember them? Those things that went round and you ran round with, pushed it, and the kids slid off and broke their legs. It was great fun. You can't do that anymore. They removed them. They even removed monkey bars. And they put plastic tubes you can crawl through as a replacement. Didn't work for me. One of the highlights of my year, possibly some of you here, was Cracker Night. It started out as Empire Night, ended up as Bushfire Night, or Bush. We just had great fun with Cracker Night. You know, where I lived, every street had a big bonfire down the end of the street, and the kids used to guard it, especially, you know, 3 days before Cracker Night, in case the locals set fire to it early. So it was a major part of our life. We used to use our billy carts, collect bottles from where I lived down at Ramsgate along the beach, and you used to get sixpence or threepence, I can't remember, from the local store as a refund. We'd save them up and we'd buy cracker. Well, you can't buy fireworks anymore. You have to sit on your ass down at the river or down by the harbour and watch the officials light these multi-million-dollar light displays. They even banned the drones in Sydney over the Vivid because they said, they didn't quite explain it. They said drones were dangerous. Anyway, the new director of Vivid in Sydney said, no, we're going to be really brave. We're bringing the drones back. So, but crackers, gone. Monkey bars, gone. You don't see anybody on stilts anymore. We used to make our own stilts. Remember those? Out of clothes props or thin wood, and put sort of like tins on them and tie them all up, and you'd walk around like a goose and usually fell off. But that was all part of growing up. I can't even mention things like shanghais. You know, I don't know. Boom. Yeah, I mean, shanghais. And knives. Every kid had a penknife. I don't now. Can't have a penknife. They have what?
They've got big ones now.
They've got big ones now, yeah. Well, we did have big ones. We had Bowie knives. Do you remember that? When Davy Crockett was travelling around the hills, well, we all bought Bowie knives. But no, they're nowhere banned. Okay, so I dissected children's folklore in Australia. The games, songs, customs, etc. And I sort of put them into sort of workable chapters. The book starts with poses a few questions. Like, I was really interested in the child convicts that came here. There were about 15,000 under 16-year-old kids that came as convicts. They were treated exactly the same as adults. So we know on the first week there was a 9-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. My question was, did these kids on all these transports have any thought of play? Or was it all drill? We know kids are imaginative, but how did they cope? And how did those kids cope that went down to the institutions? They got off the ship, they were sent to institutions or sent to service. Did they have any thoughts of play? So I didn't answer the question, I posed the question. And I also looked at all those other kids that came out as immigrant kids, all those programs like Big Brother, Fairbridge and so forth, and you know what sort of games they played, because there was some of that was documented. Because can you imagine having a whole group of kids on a sailing ship coming to Australia over months and being restricted on the deck? How did they play? We know that the later ones, the bigger ships, they actually had a matron to look after the kids and program games and so forth. But there's a lot of questions to be asked, and what sort of games they played. They played chuck penny, they played hopscotch, and so forth on the deck. They kept busy. Kids keep busy. You have to keep busy or they would drive them mad. I was also fascinated how they related to the sailors, and the sailors related to them. Did the sailors censor their songs and their language? We know that there were first, second and third class passengers. Who knows? The answer to that, I don't know. I looked at indigenous play as well. I'm no expert in indigenous play. I've probably been to more Aboriginal communities than most people, but I was fascinated because everything I read about indigenous play was pointing out that kids develop their skills for hunting and gathering as play. I don't think it was completely right. Some of the experts I've read, later experts, said no, there was play and there was also that hunter-gathering play. And the sort of games that I found documented and put into the book were fascinating to me. Like, the kids would sit round an anthill, a bull anthill, and each kid had to nominate a bull ant as their ant. And they would have to follow that ant, and that follow it and follow it and follow it. Obviously honing hunter-gathering skills. That was just one game. But we know as well, I know as well from talking to stockmen and drovers, that the Aboriginal workforce out there in the bush had a far greater skill in counting stars, for example. The drovers used to lay back and they would count the stars in the galaxy, and the Aboriginal stockmen could count hundreds more because they had somehow inherent skill of the way that they saw these stars and numbered them. I mean, extraordinary stuff. Okay, I also wanted to compare playtime in the bush and in the city. Was it different in the 19th century, particularly the latter end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century? And also, how did it differ in socio-economic groups? How did it change during depressed economic times like the 1890s and the 1930s? And so I found lots of games that involved brown paper and sugar bags and string. I mean, we lost all of that. So I found this was a good way to document it. Corks, well, they don't have corks very often these days. It's hard to find a cork, but when I was a kid, we used to get an ordinary cork and we'd cut it all out and we'd put pins down it and make a cage, and we'd trap flies and beetles in it and put them in Long Bay jail. I mean, all kids have got different stories, but these things disappeared. I was interested in action games because I was looking for particularly Australian action games. And there was one that I came across. There was an old soldier of Botany Bay, and it was like a form of charades, and the trades are all introduced and acted out. I was lucky that I went on ABC radio and talked about this, and the phones rang hot with people who remembered this particular one, and it had rhymes like there was an old soldier from Botany Bay, have you got anything to give him today? I'll give him a hat, I'll give him a coat, I'll give him a meat pie, etc. And you had to act it out. I doubt if that still survives in any form of tradition. I looked at how we sing the baby to sleep. Nursery rhymes. Obviously the stock in trade is the English nursery rhyme. And I also looked at the bridge of how parents react to kids. There's a whole lot of research being done on nursery rhymes, how the alliteration in the wording and so forth teaches the kids sounds and English, and it's amazing when you look at the facts and figures, which I've included, how many words children learn at various ages. They don't use them all, but they have them. And a lot of their skills come at very early days after Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, and all these standard ones played a very good role, and including lullabies. But I was interested to see if there are any Australian ones that I could push forward as examples. I found in the Bulletin in around 1911 that there was a whole campaign questioning exactly what I was looking for, the search for an Australian nursery rhyme. And they had competitions, and people could mail their suggestions in and receive a prize. And the other place I looked was that most newspapers when I was a kid had a children's corner where you could write to Charlie Chuckles or somebody else. And there was obviously some poor reporter was designated as Uncle Charlie or whatever, and had to deal with all this correspondence because some of the answers that I documented are just sheerly sarcastic and like, get these children away from me, I don't want to write to them. But it's very funny because they were so important to kids, especially the kids that lived in the bush. So this search for Australian nursery rhymes produced quite a lot. Some of them were doggerel or whatever, like the fierce and frightful bunyip lives in a lonely scrub and catches all the dirty boys who do not like their tub. He has a rapid aeroplane steered by a flying fox to grab the naughty little girls who never darn their socks. I mean, who wrote that? Probably somebody in a newspaper who was bored or whatever. But these things in those days used to get legs because the kids devoured those things, passed them on, and they'd get twisted and turned and go into some sort of oral circulation. Word games. I was particularly interested in word games, so many word games, and everything from secret languages. Whatever happened to Pig Latin? Do you think kids still know Pig Latin? Maybe. I remember when I used to go, when I was a kid, to the local butcher, and they used to talk backwards. And it was like, you know, something like that woman's got good tits, or something, they'd say it backwards. I can't do it. But, you know, it was obviously a secret language that butchers use. It's called butcher's talk. I believe some butchers still have it, but of course, upfront butchers, they've all disappeared with packaging and so forth. But there was a lot of things that I documented, including book titles, kids' books titles, IP, you know, a lot of Water by IP Daily, and all those sort of books, and, you know, Isabella riding Isabella Necessary on a bike, and all those sort of things. Ridiculous. I also looked at Australian board games, because we actually produced quite a lot of board games. Something in our history, probably about 50 distinctive board games. One on the sheep industry, one on yachting, believe it or not. It must have been promoted by the fact that the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. But there was also one called Corroboree that came out, which tried to explain, came out in 1940. We look at it now in horror as being politically incorrect or insensitive or appropriation. But in 1940, this woman tried to explain why she'd done a board game where, you know, you go to a humpy or you go to jail or whatever in this board game. So curios like that I found were very, very important to identify. I also looked at the playground. The playground movement in Australia, I adopted the history of that to explain that, you know, it's a relatively new thing that came about as we became more urbanised after Federation, and the role that these played, because, as you know, prior to Federation, when the bulk of the population lived in the bush, they worked 7 days. They came to the city because that's where the new work was, in manufacturing and commerce, and they got a day off, or half day off. And, you know, what the hell did they do? So they had to have a new attitude to leisure, including kids who used to work in the bush. So, the next thing I wanted to look at was the world of make-believe. Mystifying. How do kids enter the world of make-believe? And more mysterious, return back to that very same world of make-believe. And even more mysterious, invite their friends to join them, and they detail this world of make-believe beautifully. I have a lot of contributions from people right through this book. I wanted to not just be my observations, I wanted people's experience. So one of the areas was to ask people what was their idea of the world of make-believe or fairyland. You know, one girl said that she kept going back to fairyland, and when she entered fairyland, she was given a set of wings every time she went there and had to return them at the gate when she left. I mean, this makes my mind just spin. It's a lot of them also, no doubt because of Peter Pan, but a lot of them said that they could fly when they went there. I mean, great. Okay, I then looked at wonder and excitement, things like hypnotism sets, crystal radios, kaleidoscopes. They all seem to be replaced now by the internet, so they're gone. I've done a whole section on girls will be girls, but also in the intro to it said, and so will some boys. So I looked at the difference of the sexes and what games and songs and things were specifically girls or specifically boys. The answer to that is, of course, not much. I looked at girls, certain things like doll making, but I was interested in things like making dolls out of clothespins or pipe cleaners or mountain devils, you know, when I was a kid, or corn dollies. And there was a whole section I found looking through Trove on how to make twig furniture for your twig pipe cleaner family. The most interesting one was a whole custom of making dolls out of potatoes, the Spud family, because as the potato got older, it got weirder, a bit like all of us. So I thought that was really, really good. Secret Boys business, well, there was, and things like thumb fighting, knuckles, mumble a peg, we throwing a knife down, all banned of course now, but most kids played backyard wars. And you know, Peter Ellis, who long departed, he described how he played backyard wars for years, and he also, Rob Willis contributed a story about John Meredith and how he was a kid, because chasey games were such an important part of backyard wars or even playground. But Rob related from John Meredith how he didn't play cops and robbers, he played bushrangers and cops and bobbies and bushrangers, I think it was called, Rob, wasn't it? And fascinating to get these first-hand, although that was second-hand, stories about real-life adventures. Then I said I got a section about dressing up. We used to do tableaus. You know, there'd be thousands of kids in the local oval doing a map of Australia or, you know, a kangaroo. And when the Queen came out, there was one at the showground. I don't know how many schools participated, but a lot. There's a whole section of getting mobile, as I said, not the mobile phone, but tricycles, bicycles, roller skates, and stilts, and of course, clothes props and the Hills hoist. Collecting. Well, bowerbirds. People used to collect all sorts of things, buns, money, stamps and things. And I think a lot of this has gone with the internet. Certainly autograph hunting has gone. Now people have selfies. Is that part of folklore? Hard to say, but certainly I like the autograph books, and I've documented a very special one I found in a junk shop with lots of little rhymes in it. I wanted to see how they changed. One of them went, I haven't got anything in my head, so I've given you what's on it instead, and they pasted in a snip of their hair. into the book. Okay. I also put, I think, the definitive collection of Australian war songs, school songs, and chants. Hundreds of them. So many so I couldn't fit them in the book, so I had to put them on my website. But certainly the war cries were interesting, you know, chicka chicka boom 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 chicka things, and you know, mine at school was Kiora Kiora Kiana Kiana Kiora Kiori Kiana Kiara Kograh, Congra, but obviously based on a Maori chant, a haka. So why did that happen in Australia? Happened a bit in England, but particularly in Australia. And I've got lots and lots of war cries. And also play songs, taunts, and parodies. We see the survival of some of those very early ones, like, you know, I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, I live in an old tin can, I live on snails and eat up their tails. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, or I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, I live with my granny and play with the piano. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. But now you also get, as Graham pointed out, his grandchildren sing songs about gummy bears. So we know that that tradition is still alive and kicking. Okay, I look at the boogeyman, the bushrangers will get you, and all those things like the tooth fairy and so forth. There's the book. Will it be a bestseller? No, I printed it myself. It's not available anywhere. Nobody's interested in books on folklore. I've got some and I can sell to you over here. I've got about 10 copies. They're $30 instead of $40. It's a grand read. So I've got 2 more minutes or something. The reason I did it myself is I'm getting old and I just don't need to be buggered around by publishers. I just prefer to do it and get it out there to those people who are interested. I don't know if anybody's got any questions. We've got 5 minutes, I think, haven't we? Anybody got any questions? You're not shy normally. Yes, Bridget.
Did you come across Ethel Turner, who wrote, I think she and her sister wrote children's columns in the Sydney paper?
I did.
Oh, right, okay. So
Yes, and look, there were a lot of people who wrote children's stories, and there's a whole thing on stories, Australian stories, particularly Australian stories, obviously I was interested in, and those characters that jump out of the book, that, you know, the magic pudding is the obvious one that, you know, we can claim as our own, and what a great story it is. Ethel Turner was pretty well known as a writer. Anyone else? Yes, Jeff?
One of the things that fascinated me in working in the Kimberley and the Northern Territory is kids who grew up on stations and only had school there before all technology and that. So their introduction or awareness of this stuff was quite different.
Very different. Isolated communities, apart from being on the radio, the radio of the air and school of the air, they had quite a restricted view of what play was, but kids being kids, and I don't once again need to say this, are experts in creativity, and they can make games out of anything. And you know, the days of them going into the shed at the back of the property and building something or making something that is play related is endless, and we know that they were very inventive. I didn't particularly document that, but what I did document is a lot of memories where people wrote to newspapers to say who remembers the games and rhymes of our childhood, including a section in there, a very good one from the Northern Territory. So I documented that one because I just thought this is an experience unlike Sydney or Melbourne or whatever. Yes. All right, I think I've done that. Thank you, everyone.